It's a topic that's been discussed a lot in recent years. It just feels like there's a general direction in Yu-Gi-Oh towards more one card combos, right? My stance used to be like powerful one card combos just shouldn't be a thing. That doesn't feel like a modern sort of opinion anymore at this point, because it's impossible to ignore the existence of one card combos or to like hope on the fact that one card combos are never going to be a thing again. At this point in time, even the rogue decks are doing like one card combos, right? When I'm thinking OG one card combos, can anyone think of an older or more OG one card combo than like Alistair? Oh yeah, Zodiacs is a good point. It never felt like those kind of cards were ruining the game. I mean, Zodiac was a dominant deck, but it was still a good format. Alistair never completely took over. So I feel like there is a window of opportunity in design space where you can make these cards, you can make one card combos, but they don't feel overly oppressive. Maybe there's a line at which one card combos are fine to exist, at which they don't ruin the game or they don't feel like they're ruining the game. I just want to maybe talk about where that line is, right? Because I definitely draw the line somewhere before Snake Eye Ash. No matter where the line is, Snake Eye Ash is past that line. I feel like we passed the line for me personally with Lokai and Circular, which has become a complete meme at this point, but I want to keep it like a more serious discussion. That's for me personally where it kind of passed the line. Those were the kind of ones where I felt like it was frustrating that if my opponent started with that one card, they did too much. And of course, Circular looks completely tame in comparison to something like Snake Eye Ash these days. I understand that. But like, for me personally, even what Mathmech does, the fact that this deck just either sets up what it sets up or kills me with one card, I think that's past the line. Marincess, I think, is a good example for this. One of the main selling points of playing Marincess, first of all, your deck is relatively consistent because if you can play a lot of one card starters, you don't need to draw crazy combinations of cards. All you need to do is see one of your starters, right? And it also didn't require you to build your deck in such a way that you would plan to see like 3 or 4 engine cards, right? You can easily afford to draw 3 hand traps in a deck like Marincess. Why does it feel fine to play against Marincess, but it doesn't feel fine to play against Snake Eye in that regard? Like, what's the difference? I think it's relatively easy, at least for me. The difference is that one Marincess card does not win the game on its own, right? It's the power level, right? It's the ceiling of that one card. I don't even know what one blue tang ends on these days, but it used to be something like search one of the Marincess trap cards, and you could also maybe set up Argonaut or Bubble Reef. Could one card make Argonaut plus trap? I'm not even sure if it could. Either way, I don't think for me personally Marincess is the line. I think you could go a little bit more powerful than Marincess. My favorite more modern example, Melodious. Pure Melodious, that is. And I want to emphasize pure Melodious because I still think that Ostinato is not a very well-designed card because it's lacking a restriction. The Marincess pure deck obviously still has those restrictions because it has cards like First Movement Solo that lock you anyways, right? The Melodious deck for me was a good example because that deck had like room for like 15 non-engine or something, and it's relatively self-contained. That's another thing. I am a big fan when one card combos lock you into your own archetype or your typing or whatever. This is not a guarantee that it's fair though. I just want to say that it still depends on the context of what you're locked into and what kind of options that leaves you with. Being locked into plants is cool and all, but if you have all the interrupts in the world available in the plant cards, then why does it matter? If you're locked into gimmick puppets, but you still have all the tools to FTK, then why does the lock matter? I don't think that's the best argument, but it is part. Restrictions are healthy, right? Like in the case of Marincess, for example, the restrictions are very well done. Because if you're locked into water, you're kind of limited to what you can end on. With good hands, you have the option to like code. With some other hands, you have the option to go for like a Zelantis board wipe. But for the most part, I feel like in Marincess, you have a healthy lock. And the same is true, in my opinion, for Melodious. Because when you're locked in Melodious, you have still powerful options, but you lose a lot of crazy things you could otherwise do, right? Like you're limited to basically ending on Etoile, Huberta, and like Aria for protection. Those are the only things that really do anything on your opponent's turn when you're playing Melodious. Everything else doesn't really provide anything. right? And so I think those are good examples of something that, you know, works. Another good example that people have mentioned in chat that I absolutely agree with is Centurion if Calamity is banned, right? And we have that in Master Duel at the moment, and it's a 100% fine deck to exist. Honestly, fun to play against, because if my opponent normal summons a Primera in Master Duel, even if I have no interaction in my hand, their deck has Grind Game, their deck has an Omni Negate, but their deck will not lock me out of the game. Their deck will not overload me on interaction. It's a completely normal game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that's roughly where my personal line is, right? My personal line is something around Centurion without Calamity. I think Voiceless is a little bit better than Centurion in that regard. Like what one low does. Is it more powerful? It's pretty similar, right? It's an Omni Negate with follow-up, but like slightly better, because I feel like Voiceless plays through hand traps better, but that's another thing. I think that's roughly where my line is. If Voiceless is over the line, then not much. They both end on an Omni, so that's bad. I agree. Omnis are not the best form of interaction. At the same time, you do have to put it into context. If the Omni is quote unquote the only thing they do, like in the case of Centurion and Master Duel, it's like, okay. But if your deck spams Apo, Flamberge, Promethean Engrave plus an Omni, that's more problematic. I think it's fair to give these decks some context. I personally don't believe one card combos should not exist at all, and I am basing that off of the fact that I don't hate Centurion. I don't hate Marincess. I don't hate Voiceless. I don't hate Melodious. Those are all decks that I think are completely fine to exist. And to me, that means one card combos have a space in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where I find them acceptable. Unless it's circular. See, you're always making fun of me for that as if that's unreasonable. I think there's a difference between my opponent normal summoning Primera in Master Duel and my opponent using circular in Master Duel. Let's say my opponent hand traps me and I have to pass. Primera does not kill me. Circular, you're dead. When I go second in Master Duel, my opponent normal summons Primera. That's one Omni Negate. One. My opponent activates Circular. I don't even know what the current standard is, but it's a super factorial for Hand Rip, Send from Field, Omni Negate, Terahertz for a Spell Trap Negate, Heat Soul to draw 2 cards. It's not the same. This whole meme that we're riding for a year or two now, it does come from my genuine concern with one card combos that I felt like got out of hand around that time. As funny as you might think you are when you say like, oh, you criticize MathMech, but you think Primera is okay, I want to emphasize I do think there's a difference. I think it's important that one card combos can be stopped and interacted with if you draw certain hand traps. I think that's another issue with specifically Snake Eye. Makes it frustrating to play against is because the deck has pretty much no clear choke points. Because every single point where you interact with them, they can just replace it by drawing any of their extenders. This is problematic because it's basically also making those decks unstoppable. And my take is that one card combos should be relatively easy to stop because those decks have a lot of room for non-engine. When you play against those decks or when you play one of those decks, I think what you should sign up for is if you get stopped, you have to stop them with your non-engine and try again next turn. I don't think it's reasonable that you can just ignore their hand traps, keep playing, and then just back up your board with hand traps. Is Branded Fusion okay? I think Branded Fusion is hard to compare this to. It's a little different in some aspects. I wouldn't say Branded Fusion is okay, but for other reasons. I don't hate Branded. I just hate how so much of that deck is condensed in that one card. Choke points are good, but I don't believe that they should make you build a deck around one card, and then if that one card gets stopped, your deck basically does nothing unless you have a super specific combination of cards to still play. You played Branded yesterday and you still feel like that? No, I like Branded, especially if they banned Albion. I think Branded is cool. And I think Branded is not easily comparable to decks like Snake Eye, Centurion, Marincess. I think they're different. Because you can say whatever you want about Branded, at least Branded cannot ignore your hand traps. Right? If Branded gets hand trapped on Branded Fusion like Ashed or something, that deck has to significantly change how it plays. And its game plan in the TCG at the moment, at least to my understanding, is like, if I get Ashed on Branded Fusion, I try my hardest to somehow piece together a puppet lock to not get killed. Which it can, you know, there are ways to play around Ash with Branded, I'm aware, but it's not as easy and not trivial. There's no one card combo to play around Ash. Right? So in some ways, I think it's okay that Branded Fusion is such a big choke point. It feels bad when you play against Branded and you don't have Ash and the deck feels like unstoppable, right? That's also not a great feeling. but it is good that there is counterplay to that card. Does that mean Meow Meow Mew can come back? In today's environment, it could probably come back. Yeah, and this is another thing with card design that you need to be aware of. Sometimes the cards are just ahead of their time. I think if Prank Hits came out now with Meow Mew, people would not complain about it. I definitely think they have crossed the line with some one-card combos like Nightmare Throne, Snake Eye Ash. They need to be careful, basically, with the one-card combos that they give us, I think. What about Ponix? I mean, Fire King is fine, disregarding the Snake Eye cards in it. Vakaushi, yeah, see, this is the weird part, the confusing part about the TCG for me at the moment is like Vakaushi, they hit pretty much immediately because it feels like they realized we didn't like this. Like this was something that came out and got slaughtered 2 weeks later, which everyone liked. I think the difference between Vakaushi and Snake Eyes is that Vakaushi was not part of the year or two long lore archetype that OCG has decided to make incredibly powerful. Vakaushi was legacy support, one-time thing that came out, right? I think that's why Vakaushi was handled this way and Snake Eyes is handled in another way. And that's kind of sad. Because with Vakaushi, we realized the good thing for the game was to not let this happen. But for Snake Eyes, we're not doing that for other reasons. Thinking about the fact that Tier and Cash were also main lore, yeah, they've been meta for a long time because of it, right? Can we agree banning around sales instead of balance is bad for the game? I mean, yes, we agree. But unfortunately, the reality we live in is that both things are an important factor for them. Selling Yu-Gi-Oh cards is a business. I think it's unrealistic to be like they should only do it from a game balance perspective, which is often where we as the community, we're coming from that standpoint. We're like, just do what's best for the balance of the game, right? But sometimes you gotta accept that, well, I mean, they do want to sell those cards that they've designed. More fun equals more money. Theoretically, in the long run, I would agree with you. I always favor the balance of the game over short-term selling an archetype or something. On the other hand, they have managed to keep this game around for 20 plus years, right? Which a lot of other trading card games have not managed to do. So they are doing something right. Just look at what happened to Runeterra to understand. See, that's the other thing. Yeah, I actually played Runeterra. I loved Runeterra. They did a lot of things for the balance of the game and for the players and all that kind of stuff. And they made it very cheap and affordable to play. And the game died because of that, because they didn't make enough money, right? There needs to be a balance between the two things. I think Yu-Gi-Oh is more on the side of they're making too many decisions based on business, and they could do a little bit more for the health of the game. Those were just some things I wanted to get out of my system. They are things that are on my mind when I'm thinking and anticipating the August Forbidden and Limited list happening. I think it is important to discuss these things and voice these opinions. Especially the one-card combo thing was something I felt very interested in on how we feel about it in the year of 2024. I feel like in 2023, it was often like one-card combos just shouldn't exist, period. Which was also something that I'm sure I've said at some point. But I feel like they've shown this year that they can design one-card combos in two very different ways, right? They can make them in a fine way, or they can make them in a very problematic way. Just make more of the first kind and get rid of the second, and then we're okay.